Hey everyone, Rua here with the next installment in the Editorial series. Now, in my last video I briefly touched on Monk, and having read through the interesting recent posts on the Monk forum, I decided to do some digging. What I'm addressing this time around is why is Monk considered the weakest of the DPS jobs? As far as I see it, there's three main questions here. Is it really the weakest DPS? Why do people think it is? And does the job need any adjustments? To contextualise my points, I'll be showing you footage from two kin fights, one with a ninja and a monk as the main sources of damage, and another with a rune fencer and samurai in their stead. To ensure it was a fair contest, and to best emphasise my points, I kept the degree of support the same for both instances. The most common issue I hear about Monk is that it lacks weapon skill power. This is indeed a valid point, as hand-to-hand weapon skills are in dire need of an update. But the more pressing issue here is that Monk just doesn't fit into the meta of powerful weapon skills from the heavy DPS jobs. The melee meta these days is centered around overwhelming a target with powerful weapon skills before the fight drags out too long. This is why I think people tend to look down their noses at Monk. While the Monk's weapon skills generally fall short of heavy DPS alternatives, it gains a lot of ground back with its melee damage over time, something which really adds up. They don't pay a heavy price for their attacks either, as a Monk feeds very little TP to their target. Rather than being a great zerging job, Monk is more of an endurance fighter that can keep in a fight for a very long time. This is why it synergizes so well with Ninja and Dancer, as you'll see in this clip. Subtle Blow is a trait that players generally write off as being worthless, but I beg to disagree. Subtle Blow reduces the TP given to your target when attacks connect. It's a trait that's negligible in small amounts, but when you start stacking it, or have jobs with a lot of it innately like Monk and Ninja, you really start noticing it. Most of the dangerous attacks in the game, from NMs, tend to be powerful TP attacks which can be dealt with by a good group. However, when NMs start spamming them due to excessive TP feed, they can become a problem. Other NMs, like Kin here, have absorption mechanics built into their TP phases which can really drag a fight out. Monk gets around this problem almost entirely by getting 75% Subtle Blow, and the Penance ability built into Chi Blast. Penance reduces the TP gain of a target by up to 35%. Which, coupled with the aforementioned 75% Subtle Blow, does a great job of slowing things down. This brings me to another reason why I think Monk is looked down on. It excels at slowing down dangerous NMs, while the meta is just to power through them and hope for the best. Healers and support, especially if dispels are involved, would find a Monk's group a lot easier and a lot less stressful to deal with. I really think it's just that. I think it's a meta issue, as there's nothing explicitly wrong with a Monk itself, aside from a few tweaks it could use. I've already mentioned weapon skill damage, but I'll get to that in a moment. Firstly, since melee damage over time is such a large part of its overall damage output, Impetus could use a buff. As it stands, Impetus increases a Monk's accuracy, attack, critical hit rate, and critical hit damage with each successive hit that lands. The thing is, this value resets to 0 as soon as an attack misses, which is pretty bad considering that you will inevitably miss sometime. I would adjust Impetus so it doesn't reset in this manner. I would also increase the duration of Penance by at least 30 seconds. That way it lasts for half of Chi Blast's cooldown. Counterstance also needs an adjustment. Counterstance greatly increases the Monk's counterattack rate, but tanks their defense as a trade-off. The defense penalty is too heavy, so I would half it to 25% so it mirrors something more like Berserk or Last Resort. Small adjustment I know, but it would help. What would I do about hand-to-hand weapon skills though? This one's a bit tricky, as you don't want to push it too far and end up making the job overpowered like it was back in the Abyssea days. You also don't want to have a knock-on effect to make Puppet Master overpowered as well. If the aforementioned adjustments to Impetus were made, then Victory Smite having its FTP transfer across all of its hits would make it very powerful. On paper, Victory Smite and CDC are actually very similar, the only major difference being that the stat modifier is different and the FTP transfers on the latter. Doing this would give a viable zerging option for Monks. One of the advantages Monk has over other DPS jobs is that those other jobs usually have to go out of their way to cap out their Subtle Blow value, often at the expense of other key values like Store TP and multi-attack. Monk has a solid Subtle Blow base built into it, and it's on 3 pieces which break the 50% cap which it usually uses in its typical TP set. So it can hit 75% very easily, whereas heavy DPS have to go out of their way to even hit the cap. Reaching the Subtle Blow cap may not be necessary if you're fighting something that either doesn't have nasty TP attacks or has mechanics built into their TP phases, but it's still an option and it's something Monk really excels at. Add to this fact that Monk is the only job in the game which can give a strong max HP boost to its entire party, through Mantra, and what you've got is a job which helps keep fights under control, while limiting the frequency of potentially dangerous TP attacks, and above all giving the healer a much easier time. I think that people have really been selling Monk short, but to really hammer my point home I need to compare what you've just seen to a more typical frontline setup. Incidentally, this was easily the smoothest and quickest kin fight I've ever been in. It bears repeating that I've used the exact same level of support for both of these fights. Both groups have had an Idris Geomancer, a Regal Corsair, and a fully kitted out Bard. I've covered all the bases to make sure that this was a fair fight. Now, the reason I've been using Kin as an example is because it's a fight I still see tripping players up when they either drag the fight out too long by healing him, or worse yet, outright lose to him. Limiting Kin's TP gain usually entails having only one person on him, but even then, we're all liable to slipping up. Kin's also a really good NM to showcase the applications of this method. There are ways other DPS jobs can reach the subtle blow cap, and like I said just then, it may not always be necessary, but here's how you can. A fully upgraded White Mage can cast the Auspice spell to give 25% in one go. Monk's roll from a Corsair will fully cap out at 50%, but that entails giving up one of either Chaos or Samurai roll. A Thief can use Conspirator to fully cap out at 50% if everyone in their party is on the target's hate list, but it only lasts a minute. Finally, a Rune Fencer can merit Sword Sleight and get up to 30% while sword play is active. This can also be done for equipment, but like I said, chances are a heavy DPS is going to have to go out of their way to do it properly, and even then they're not going to be able to break the cap in the same way a monk can. The 4 pieces of equipment which break the subtle blow cap are the Sherida earring, the Nikmadu ring, the Moonbow belt, and the Dagon breastplate. The fact that all 4 of those pieces come from Omen really makes you wonder if this is how the developers wanted us to defeat these bosses, using this exact approach. Not to give too much away, but this fight goes on for a little bit longer, which kind of emphasises my overall point. If you want to skip ahead to the end of the fight, I have some closing comments there. There's also some commentary dotted between now and then if you want to keep watching this part. I'm showing the entire fight just so people can really see the difference in TP rate and kill speed using different jobs. I've had to turn here so Haldorin could get Kin off of me. If I'd kept the throttle down I would have been locked by 11th dimension, which would have really complicated things. My rune is no slouch as a DPS, so in this fight I'm doing the same thing as my ninja was in the previous fight, being a DPS that just happens to tank. I'm hitting harder than my ninja though, which is why I've ended up having to turn away. This isn't to say that Haldorin is bad though, it's just that my rune really does hit that hard. I'll be sure to get around to a proper Rune Fencer DPS guide soon. I'm actually considering it as my next guide. I've been such a convert to this style of fighting that I've actually allocated merits to Sword Slate for the subtle blow effect. I took merits out of Rake, but I still kept it 1 out of 5. I know that Halloran wasn't using an AG Masamune, but he still put up a really good fight, enough to get Kin off me promptly. Besides, I was hitting so hard that the damage output should have been the same as last time, the only difference being us having to watch out for Kin's TP attacks, which were coming a lot more frequently. So, what are my closing thoughts on this little experiment? Well, the results speak for themselves. The first fight with Monk and Ninja clocked in at 4 minutes and 40 seconds with 11 TP attacks used. The second fight with Rune Fencer and Samurai clocked in at 7 minutes and 35 seconds with 29 TP attacks used. That's almost triple. More impressively though, the window between TP attacks was quite telling. In the first fight, there was a good 30 to 40 second window between TP attacks, even at low HP. In the second fight, TP attacks were going off every 10 to 13 seconds. That's quite something. I'm going to be trying this out in other content going forward, and yes, I need to cap out Monk myself for inevitable job guide. So, in conclusion, I listed the problems I think Monk has. Victory Smite needs an update and a few of Monk's abilities could use an adjustment, but really, Monk's major problem isn't a problem with it itself, it's a problem with a meta that's become too entrenched and resistant to deviation. Ninja, Dancer and a few other jobs off the top of my head all have this same problem, the lack of player willingness to experiment and try different approaches to content. Monk's style doesn't fit all, as the golden rule of shit situational applies to it as it does to everything else. Still, Monk shouldn't be discounted, it just needs better PR. I'll wrap this up here. My next video will probably be the ambuscade tutorial for when the guard changes next week, and following that I'm going to finally do a DPS Rune Fencer guide. Finally! I'll see you all then.